Hi, everyone. Eve Harow, Rejuvenation on the Land of Israel Network. October 10th, 2023, the 25th day of Tishrei, 5784. The Jewish holidays just finished like 3 days ago, but it seems like it's been a month since Shabbat and Simchat Torah. As I'm sure all of you know who are listening to this, it is incredibly tense here in Israel. And I am certainly not the only one who has sons and sons-in-law who have been called up, and I cannot recommend to any of you. I hope that none of you ever have to have the experience of being in the room when your son kisses his wife and children goodbye. So they should all, that's how I just want to start off, and that's how I'm going to end off also. They should all just come home safely. We should eradicate the evil that is the world's evil. It's just that we're at the front of it. And since I really, as I said last time I had David Wurmser on, I could do a podcast where I cried the entire time, or we could actually do something a little bit serious. So David Wurmser, who's like my favorite analyst, which is maybe if I have a TV show, that will be the name of the TV show. My favorite Martian, my favorite analyst. I just totally dated myself, is in Israel. So of course, and we're on a couple of different groups together, and as usual, his insights and his analysis are so right on. So I decided I couldn't keep him to myself, and I had to share him with all of you once again. So David, from your hotel in Tel Aviv, how are you doing today?
Well, I'm doing good. Like the rest of Israel, though, I'm waiting, anticipating, nervous, heartbroken, angry.
Yeah.
There's all those things at once, and all those things in waves.
Yeah. I keep Shabbat like I normally am, not online on Shabbat. But when we saw what was going on, so for the first time in many, 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 many years, I was on my phone on Shabbat, keeping track of what was happening and I think we're all still in shock. I mean, I think what's happening here in Israel, and there are some people who are talking about it, is how this happened. But most of us are just kind of steeling ourselves and trying to keep our strength for what is going to happen. And we figure that we can, take apart this tremendous failure at some other time. But maybe you want to say a couple of words about that, about what you think happened here that allowed. I mean, just by the dead bodies that we have, there are 1,500 dead Hamas terrorists within Israeli territory that our army managed to kill. But as we know, that for a few critical hours on Saturday morning, the communities in the western side of the Negev were basically on their own. So do you have any thoughts or that you can share with us about what happened here?
Yeah, I mean, on the most immediate level, there must have been at least 2,000 to 3,000 terrorists across the border. I mean, and one has to look at it not only as an invasion. It was an invasion by an army, but it was terrorists.
Right.
And they operated with terrorist strategies. And I don't just mean by the cruelty of what they've done. I mean, their tactics were also terrorist. And
can you explain that for a second? How would a terrorist infiltration, how does that look different from an army infiltration?
Well, an army would be combined arms, a crossing of a border, like in a coherent military formation that's identifiable, and so forth. This is a bunch of people bursting through the border in units of 2 or 3 or 7, or maybe even 10. Some as much as 20, but on motorcycles. And they're racing across the landscape in motorcycles, high mobility, many of them not dressed as any soldiers, right. Many of them.
Or dressed as Israeli soldiers. Yeah.
Right. And also they had no intention of logistics lines, of securing their lines, of consolidating territory. They had one objective, which was to get to points where people are and kill them. So one segment of the whole effort raced all the way across to Ofakim, which is 25 kilometers from the border, right. And got there very quickly. And these are suicide missions. There was a regular army would worry about its back and its withdrawal plans and its lines of communication and resupply and territorial control and those sorts of tactics. No, these were units that had one purpose in mind, which is to enter populations and kill them. And so they behaved very differently. So that's what I mean by a terrorist army. And it's a bit more difficult to see that and stop it, because you don't see a unit massing on the other side of the border with proper equipment and proper preparation. You will see it at the very end, perhaps, but it's not a normal military activity. So the normal measures of, Hamas is about to try to burst through the border and do X, that wasn't.
Well, so there's been a lot of talk here in Israel about how it was on the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War, and about it was like that same kind of intelligence failure. But of course, the major differences are what you just pointed out, that there was a massing on our borders of troops, of Syrian and Egyptian troops that we, for whatever reason, missed. And the big difference, of course, is that it was a war, and there were soldiers who were fighting soldiers. And in this case, it was people who clearly, who went into villages and raped women and killed children and took people hostage, which is another thing that we can talk about in a few minutes, the hostage situation, and very, very different. So, and then, but my question is, and of course they went into, they knew about this party. They must have known about it ahead of time, where thousands of people were. And the numbers, I think, are now 270 bodies that were found there. And I spoke to someone who was there who managed to get away. And nightmare doesn't even begin to describe some of the scenes that were there. But what I want to know is how could this happen? I understand that it's easier to see tanks lining up on a border than it is to see people running around in sweatshirts on a motorcycle and anticipate that they're going to come in. But one of my daughters, her job when she was in the army 10 years ago, and she's still suffering PTSD from it, was to be a tatzpitanit. She was one of the girls who looks into the cameras, and they monitor the border all the time. They never take their eyes off the cameras. She told me that this was exactly their nightmare scenario, exactly this, because they knew they were dealing with terrorists, and they knew that they were going to see people pop up out of the middle of a field, dressed in Israeli army uniforms. And so once they came out of that hole, there was going to be no way of knowing if they were our army or terrorist infiltrators. And so they had to keep an eye on everything all the time. If a rock moved, because in those split seconds, everything changes. And so where was this? Do you think this was, people are talking about like some kind of cyber attack that Iran and Russia together separately? What do you think?
I think that eventually we'll know all this. This is going to be unveiled, examined and unveiled, and I'm sure already the military knows a lot more than we do about what actually happened. But I don't, there's clearly an intelligence failure that is ultimately rooted to a conception that is exactly the same conception as 73, which is deterrence works, and it works because Israel is so powerful that who would dare? How would this ragtag army of dangerous but small, lightly armed terrorists genuinely threaten Israel's security? They can't. Mm-hmm. So we can deter them. That was the concept this time, and the concept in 73 was we had won so big in 1967. Why on earth would they think they can win? And therefore, they don't think they can win. And therefore, they won't try. So the same conception failed. Although the difference is one major conception failed in 73. A whole parade of conceptions failed here. Mm-hmm. That's only one of them. So I think there was a conceptual failure that dates back really. Unfortunately, I hate to say it, but Israel's security establishment consistently falls into this pit. Yeah. You saw it in 2006 in Lebanon. You saw
I would say for 30 years since Oslo.
Yeah, I was about to say Oslo. You had it that they're so weak. Their weakness is our manipulative strength over them. You saw it in 1996 in Lebanon in the Zam, the Grapes of Wrath operation. There's this consistent belief that the Arabs cower in front of Israeli power and won't do anything. When in point of fact, we don't realize, first of all, that a lot of these organizations Israel's facing really are sent by other nations that are willing to sacrifice those organizations for a larger strategic goal. So Hezbollah is not an independent organization. It is not a Lebanese organization. It is a unit of the IRGC. As ultimately Iran, exactly, as ultimately those who did this are. There's a little more independence to Hamas, or let me rephrase that. There's a little more independence to some parts of Hamas, but by and large, they are now wholly beholden to Iran, as is Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and they work together. And at the end of the day, they're answering to Iran's strategic directives on this. And I think the strategic directive being sent was a regional, you may be horribly mauled by the Israeli army at the end of this, but your political fortunes in the long run are entirely dependent on the reputation of Iran. And if you deliver us a victory, even at such a great cost, then whatever cost that you will pay will be rapidly reversed by the rising tide of Iranian success. So I think that dynamic is never appreciated, not in 2006 by the IDF, not now with this. So that's another level of failure.
Well, there's also things that seem like to contraindicate each other, like Iran is Shia and Hamas is Sunni, and on a normal day, if there are ever normal days, they hate each other and kill each other. But they seem to have made some kind of pact here that killing Israelis is more important than anything else. And I think it's something that we've discussed before, and our mutual friend, Dr. Harold Road, has written about this extensively, and Bernard Lewis and others. Their whole point here was to humiliate us and to kill civilians. That's exactly what brings them honor in the twisted way that they think.
It brings them honor, but it also brings them strategic gain. You know, we in the West constantly, and Israel suffers this as part of the West, think in strictly large-scale military terms. So victory is a fairly clear thing when you have one army beating another army, disarming it, and breaking the political will of their opponent by disarming their means for waging war. Goes back 200 years more. The Arabs have a different way of war. It is all psychological. It is manipulative. It isn't based on power as much as it's based on the perception of power, the perception of willpower in particular. And what happened 2 days ago, and this I think really dictates is the path of Israel's strategic answers here. Their decision was to humiliate Israel, to make it look weak. Serves several roles. One is any nation in the region that was thinking of making peace won't make peace if Israel looks weak, because nobody wants to make peace with the loser. They're just a strategic burden. The second thing is it convinces everybody else in the region that wants to make war on Israel that Iran is the path to do it, and Israel's vulnerable, and you can do it to Israel. So it encourages war, discourages peace, and even in the United States and in the West, it raises questions about Israel's long-term viability if it can't defend itself like this, and it seems to be racked with incompetence, blah, blah, blah. So that was the strategic purpose here, is to really whittle away at Israel's own sense of power and ultimately solidity. Now, and so the strategic response to this has to be so stunning, so shocking. I hate to use this word, but so traumatic, not dramatic, traumatic.
And disproportional.
Oh, vastly disproportional, vastly disproportional. So that there is no question that the initial humiliation is erased or transcended. This has to end with a major geopolitical shift in the region that turns the tide of strategic momentum away from Israel and onto Iran at the end.
So this is the sense that I'm getting from other Israelis, and I feel this way as well. We don't want to have a war now where we bury, I don't know how many people, and then in 3 years, Hamas is strong again, and we do this again. We've been doing this 2014 and 2016, and we want this to end now, you know, and what you're saying, are we ready to reconfigure the Middle East? The fact that the Americans have sent their aircraft carrier, which is, from my understanding, can be a real game changer in the region, is making some of us hope that maybe we're, and the support that we're getting from around the world, at least temporarily, because of the obscenity of what Hamas did here. Even people who normally aren't friends with us are, like, I think, shocked to their core over what has happened here. So it seems like we have some kind of window to maybe really restructure the Middle East. But like, what is your dream? You know, if they called you in and they said, what do you want us to do? Like, ultimately, give us the whole basket of what you want to have happen here.
Let me build the case for a certain strategy rather than just outline it, because it will sound too shocking just outlining it.
Okay.
One of the things that is very clear that happened in Gaza is the concept of letting your enemy build up until he's powerful,
as long as it's
and then
quiet,
you'll deal with it.
Right.
Has failed. You nip these things in the bud. The second thing is when they're powerful and you try to have a structure of deterrence, they set the agenda. They choose when they go to war. They surprise you when they want to surprise you. There's a conflagration when it serves them politically and not you. And there's no way you can ultimately deter it, as we saw. Why? Because when you put a cobra in your bed and you think you can tame it, you will be bitten and you will be killed. There is no scenario in which you can sleep with a cobra and not come out dead. So if it's a teeny little cobra this big, that's pretty bad. But if you feed it and you let it grow in your bed, that's suicide. And that's exactly what Israel did with the PLO, with Hamas, etc. So at the end, if that's the case, then mowing the lawn, namely teaching Hezbollah, teaching Hamas a lesson, means that you're still letting them ultimately dictate the agenda, dictate when the next conflagration happens. You're never going to convince them not to do anything.
Right.
It's in their DNA to kill you. It's like it's in the DNA of a cobra to bite you. You can't change his behavior because it's who it is. So essentially, if you can't mow the lawn, if you can't deter it, you have to destroy it. The problem is Hezbollah. A lot of Israelis are, oh my God, now you want to expand the war. I understand that. I fear greatly the power of Hezbollah. But Hezbollah is the same problem as Hamas.
Right.
It has been allowed to build up to such vast proportions. It dictates the agenda. You could see it. It's
essentially Lebanon, right? Hezbollah is essentially Lebanon.
It has taken over Lebanon.
Yeah.
Lebanon is now an extension of Hezbollah and Iran. And you could see it last month when they seized territory that was demarked as part of Israel and put up a tent there. The IDF was afraid of doing anything. They openly said, no, we can't do anything because if we do, Hezbollah might escalate. That was the best admission there was, that the agenda is set by Hezbollah, and there will be war when Hezbollah decides war will be, and there will be the type of war that Hezbollah decides, and it will happen when politically and militarily it will gain most from that, which means ultimately Iran. So Iran controls the agenda. So I believe that, obviously, I don't believe that you can have any survival of Hamas and Gaza at the end of this. I believe they have to be eradicated, but I'm not even sure that's a sufficient enough victory to erase the humiliation and perception of weakness that Israel faces now, and will haunt it in a very dangerous and grave way for a decade or two. Sadly, and I don't have children in the military, I have a lot of friends in the military. I have, but I don't have my children, so I don't want to advocate it. But I do know that Hezbollah is at the edge of really pushing war anyway. They've mobilized the Radwan units opposite the Golan Heights. There's all sorts of signs of surging forces to the south. Civilians who are listening to Hezbollah are fleeing north. I think that it's almost Hezbollah is going to make a decision, and it may well make the decision to go to war. If that happens, the destruction of Hezbollah, like the destruction of Hamas, really has to be the strategic answer, because that will begin to really change the nature of the Middle East. Syria's regime relies on the power of Hezbollah to survive. The IRGC uses the structure of Hezbollah to establish its presence on the Golan Heights, opposite Israel, and in Lebanon. So the destruction of Hezbollah so threatens the Syrian regime. If Israel adds to it, linking up and establishing a corridor to the Druze and who are rising up in Suwaida, which, by the way, is an idea I wish I had come up with, but it's really Ehud Yari's idea, so I have to give him credit.
So explain
you can
for
really
my listeners. The Druze are a minority in Israel who are very loyal to Israel, the ones who are in Israel. Some of our best soldiers, correct, including one who fell yesterday, are Druze. And they're also in the Golan Heights, and they're also in Lebanon. They don't want their own country. They never really have. They're just very loyal to whomever they feel keeps them safe.
And there's also a large amount of them that are in southwest Syria. Namely, if you go to the southern part of the Golan Heights and you go west 50 kilometers or so, you come to the mountains that are the areas of the Druze. And
so they could be like a bulwark for us, like a loyal bulwark against Iran.
They're in revolt against Assad. Mm-hmm. They're in revolt. In the last 2-3 months, they have risen up against Syria in a great way, very dangerous way, such that the Syrians have had to put 2 divisions around them with the warning that they will kill them all, slaughter them. Mm-hmm. And after what happened in Gaza, we know what that means.
Yes, we do.
So because the Syrians as well they're all the same barbarians. That's the problem. They're all one. It's this panoply of the universe of ISIS and Iran, and so they're all. This is just who they are. Mm-hmm. It's the darkness. So, at any rate, all that can really threaten, if not topple, the Syrian regime. And if the Syrian regime is deeply threatened or even toppled, then Iran strategically really is falling back on itself. Its basic structures of strategic assertion in the Middle East are defeated. And it will be forced to pull back out of fear that this will ripple back into Tehran. And Iran already faces an internal uprising that's very serious. Mm-hmm. And in these regimes, the people who are under the foot of these regimes have the best sense of smell of weakness of any people on the face of the earth. We saw that with the Eastern Europeans at the end of the Cold War and so forth. If they smell weakness in Tehran, they're going to give that government a run for the money. So if this war ends with the destruction of Hamas and Hezbollah, and Iran reeling, scared, anxious, and visibly fighting for its life in its own capital, that is the level of strategic defeat that will erase the humiliation and weakness that Israel is now suffering.
So I'll give you my wish list for, let's say, a few weeks from now. One is that the Egyptians open the border with Gaza and the Gazans leave. And I really don't care what happens to them after they get to Sinai. The world is so into refugees these days, they can take some of them also. Okay, I'm sure there's room in Germany and in Sweden for a few more Muslims. They've been taking them in for everywhere else. Let them deal with it. And then we take back Gaza. Okay, because we can't live with people like this next to us. We just can't. What my listeners may not know is that a lot of the kibbutzim and moshavim, some of whom will never come back, honestly, Kibbutz Be'eri lost the last body count was 108 people when they went house from house now to find the bodies out of a community of 1,000. It's going to be very difficult for them to be able to come back. And a lot of these communities are there since the 1940s, since before the modern day state of Israel. And they did a tremendous job then, in protecting Israel from Gaza at the time and in planting and giving us food. I mean, extraordinary people, but many of them would consider themselves on the left or maybe center left. And I have friends that I was in touch with during this whole time who were worried about their friends in Gaza, because one of my friends, Adele Raymer, she said, there are good people in Gaza who hate the Hamas, and I'm worried about them. And this maybe, David, is maybe our Achilles heel, because we do worry about good people. We do. It's easy to go around Israel today and say, I just wish every Arab would die. Just like that. Okay, but it's not going to happen. And B, some of them are good people. And who was it? The president of El Salvador who said yesterday, and he considers himself from Palestinian lineage, whatever the heck that means. But he said, get rid of Hamas. They're the worst thing to happen because they don't let us develop as normal people. They look like who we are, and we are all not like them. We're all not murderous. Ugh.
There are good people I'm sure there are good people in Gaza. You do them no favors by leaving them under the control of Hamas.
Which is occupied Gaza. Gaza is occupied. It's occupied by Hamas.
Yeah. I'm sure they would rather leave than stay under Hamas's rule.
Mm-hmm.
And I bet they're rooting in their heart.
Yes.
Yeah, and they're rooting in their hearts for the Israelis to win.
Mm-hmm. And the same thing in Lebanon. And the same thing in Lebanon. So there's the wish list here that we get rid of Hamas in Gaza, that we clean Lebanon of Hezbollah, that we create some kind of Druze entity in the Golan, the northern Israel, the Golan Heights, and the eastern part of the Golan Heights and Syria, and get rid of Assad, who's a blight on humanity and has been for a long time. And there's some kind of regime change in Iran, because what I understand is most Persians are also, they hate their regime, and they of course want to be free. And we could change a lot of things here, but why does Israel have to do this by ourselves? There are so many people out there who hate the people that I just mentioned, even more than we do, because they're the ones suffering from them. So isn't it time for the world to say, we're going to help you do this?
The world is fickle, and they don't get it. There's in Tolkien, in The Hobbit, there's a passage which talks about sleepless malice stirs, and it's on the move. It's a beautiful passage. And that's the West doesn't understand. I mean, you said right up front in the podcast about 10 minutes ago that it's what was it? It started. It's Israel. Israel's paying the price of a world problem. Something like that. It started with Israel, but it's really a world. It's really the world's problem. There is something going on in the world. Part of it is American power, sadly. And I believe
or lack of same.
Yeah, I think this is the ultimate consequences of the Obama era, which is that American power was diminished and diminished greatly. And with it comes a fundamental rise of threat, of danger, and evil. Because what we're learning is Iran, these sorts of countries, they are not countries we disagree with. Venezuela, the narco-terrorists who just took over Colombia, these are evil people. These are evil people whose essence is evil and psychotic and sadistic. And as a result, there is no negotiation or diplomatic process by which you contain them. There is no deterrent strategy where you defang them. They are deadly. They will always be deadly. And what you see with Hamas, one of the things that you said, so they were building tunnels years ago. Israel devised devised the structure to discover those tunnels. Every single minute of every single day since that day that Israel built the anti-tunnel structure, Hamas has been spending every energy they have. They eat for this, they live for this, they think of this. They are obsessed of circumventing that and killing Jews. That is all they are. They're just a Jew killing machine. So there is nothing. They eat in order to kill Jews. So our belief that you can take somebody with that sort of an animus and in any shape or form control them is delusional. So
There've been a lot of delusional people who thought that we could
there were a
placate
lot of delusional
people who even felt that it was our fault. It's because we took land that they feel is theirs. We don't have to discuss if it was theirs, it doesn't matter. If we give them land, they'll like us. If we give them jobs, they'll like us. We can somehow placate them, and one day all their jihadist ideas will go down.
Right.
So let's let more people into Israel to work.
Right, and we can see how open-minded they are by the way they treated the Yazidis in Iraq and how they treat. I mean, these
and what's going on in North Africa, which I think most of my listeners probably have no idea.
Nigeria,
every single day, Christians, especially, but not only, are getting slaughtered. What happens in Gaza, in Western Negev from Gaza on Saturday, happens, I would say, every single week somewhere in Africa, and nobody knows and nobody cares.
Yeah. So evil stirs in the world and is moving. And this is a function of the erosion of American power. Good in the world was upheld by the victory of the United States in the Cold War, and the good of the international structure was upheld by an America that understood who it was, understood its own values, and defended them. And what you have is an America that's lost its way. And as a consequence, you see evil stirring in the world. And Israel, unfortunately, is now paying the frontline heavy price, or the heavy price of being on the front line, of feeling it. So it is a global problem. But unfortunately, Israel has to deal with it alone, because I don't think the complacency that the Israeli elites had, which was really a Western malady, you see it in the military and so forth, that no, they can't possibly think of a suicidal war or anything like that.
Because we wouldn't, so they can't.
Right. So that
complacency
is a Western complacency. It's a Western malady. Israel is, in the last 48 hours, going through a gut-wrenching and racingly fast transformation of conception and imagery. Its complacency is gone. It's being replaced almost by a lack of confidence. But the Western elites overall in America and Europe, they're living still in a bubble of complacency. All you have to do is look at Lampedusa Island in southern Italy, in the sea, and see that it is now majority immigrant, refugee, whatever you want to call it. They're invading.
Infiltrators from the Arab world.
Infiltrators. Yes. And Europe can't deal with it because they don't seem to think it's a big threat. France just went through a summer of great riots.
Right.
And still they don't seem to understand that when their population is 20 or gets to 30% Muslim, they're going to face what Israel just faced, probably before that. So there's a complacency out there that is stunning, and that's really behind it. And I don't see the correction yet. They think this is an Israeli misfortune, not a Western. This is a reflection of Israel, not a reflection of the West's delusions.
You say complacency, and one of the things that I'm not suffering from is that kind of mind switch in the last 48 hours, because I, as you know, and some of us have been there for a long time. We never thought this was going to work. I've lived in Israel for 35 years, and I've spent those 35 years doing everything I can to settle Judea and Samaria, to stop Oslo. I moved down to Gaza the summer of 2005. I went and tried to get against the Gilad Shalit deal, with all due respect to his family, because setting a precedent of releasing 1,000 terrorists who have murdered thousands of other people since they've been released was going to be an awful thing to do. Call it behavioral psychology, call it common sense, whatever it is. So at least I have been spared that in the last 48 hours. And I told you so feels terrible. But what I am feeling, and I think many Israelis are feeling, is a tremendous crisis of confidence in our leadership. If this could happen, then how am I supposed to believe some of what they're telling me about other things? Because they were so wrong on this. Someone like Yaakov Amidror, for whom I had tremendous respect over the years, he came out yesterday and said I was wrong. These are intelligence people. These are people who have access to information that I don't have. So I have to feel that, that they're getting it right.
I mean, the 1973 war, the elite, the military elite, the military establishment, they found their 2 or 3 scapegoats.
Yeah.
They found Dado, the chief of staff, threw him
Right.
under the bus.
And Golda.
They blamed it all on
Right.
intelligence. And that's an easy one because intelligence failed. But it's in the nature of intelligence to fail often. Why? Because it's the nature of your enemy to hide what he's doing. It's the nature of your enemy to lull you into a false sense of security by mobilizing, demobilizing, mobilizing, surging toward the border, then not doing anything. There's mind games that are going on in intelligence all the time. So it comes with the turf that you're going to miss it at times, which then raises the question, why would you base an entire strategy on having to get it right with intelligence? Why was Israel's deployment in 73, the strategic positioning and structure of the Israeli military such that it needed that 72-hour warning to survive? Why did Israel need to know what Hamas was going to do in advance? I think probably by the time those motorcycles were racing toward the border 100 yards away,
right,
that was probably already too late.
Yeah, because they went in and they took hostages and they were already in these villages, and we had tremendous firefights. And also, again, because we're trying to save our people. We didn't just know that they were terrorists in one of the villages and just bombed the village, because we wanted to get our people. And that is what we still want to do. And that's one of the things that Israelis now are being ripped apart, this whole idea of the hostages. And my understanding is that in the next few hours, the Hamas is going to be putting out films of the hostages, because there's a message that's going around to parents: take your children's phones away now, because we don't want them seeing. We're trying to protect our children. As we always do. So from seeing what's going on, because they know that how worried we are about what's being done to them, about who's there. And that's like a major heartbreak that, my husband's a physician. One of his patients came in absolutely distraught because they don't know where her niece is. Is she a hostage? Was she killed? It's a small country.
Yeah.
Everybody knows something. But the thing about what you had said about the complacency of the Western governments, it seems maybe that it's a little more nefarious. Barack Obama, you could see he reluctantly choked out a statement yesterday about how terrible it was. But of course, he had to end it with, I hope we can resolve this, and the Palestinians will have whatever it is, their state or two states.
It was an equivocation.
Yeah.
When you have 1,500 dead Israelis that didn't just get killed, but were cruelly treated in the most perverse and unimaginable acts of atrocity committed before killing them and then after killing them, you don't sit there and you have on the one hand, on the other hand statement.
Right. Exactly.
And that's what it was. It's you don't condemn the Holocaust, but
right. But if they only weren't walking around the cities with their big hats and peyot, maybe people wouldn't have resented the Jews. But you also have this, what should be one of the biggest scandals ever in American history, what happened with Robert O'Malley. And how
see, I think that's the thing. I think you're right. This is something, there's a malice here.
There's a plan here.
I don't want to accuse people of things I can't prove. But first of all, apparently our security structures do have enough there to be strongly suspicious of Robert Malley. He ran Iran policy. He also had a huge influence on the rest of Israeli on the rest of Middle East policy toward Israel. He was essentially, in many ways, the de facto acting Near East assistant secretary. Who did he bring in? He brought in this Adrian Tabatabai, who is clearly an Iranian agent.
Why is she still in her position? Why is she still in position?
I don't know. Because to fire her admits the problem that people like Anthony Blinken and people like John Kerry wanted these people in because those were the people who were going to deliver the policy they wanted.
And to give $6 billion to Iran last week. I mean, you almost have to have just an IQ higher than a houseplant to put all this together.
Yeah, but they think the enemy
Is
are the people in Washington who are the warmongers against Iran. That is their conception of the world. It's exactly like the damage and the distortion of the Oslo process, where when wave after wave after wave after wave of terrorism happened, you got this really feeble response, almost insulting response, that the enemies of peace, lumping together the Israeli opposition with Hamas, who had done this, or frankly, the PLO that had done this. No, these were not enemies of peace. These were Jew killers. That's who they were, and they were being sent by the people you were negotiating with, and so there's this formula of the real enemy are the hardliners in our own government. So for them, they didn't see the Iranians as their enemy. They saw those in Washington who wanted to do, whether it's John Bolton or whoever, wanted to take an extremely hardline Iran policy. Same
but
with in Oslo.
but what
We
do they
didn't get,
think is going to come out of Iran? I mean, if Iran goes nuclear, or already is, Iran is so clear about their jihadi aspirations. Why support Iran in any way when you are a Western person? They want to
but they're not a
control the
Western
world.
person. They're not a Western person. They believe the West is evil. I mean, when you put the 1619 Project in America together with the Justice Democrats, the Squad, the progressives,
The
the radical
Marxist,
left,
the Marxist
the Marxists, the
education that
radical left
anybody in
in Europe,
university is now getting
right,
flat
the
out.
radical left in Europe, their basic point is the West is evil. The West is the problem. It isn't a policy that is bad. It is the very essence of the West that they say is bad. And that America is still a slave country in their mind. We've learned how to turn slavery into something that looks like freedom, but is actually an incredibly nefarious form of slavery. That is the view of the 1619 Project, and that is now the view of the progressives in the United States. Ocasio-Cortez gets out there and she says outright that capitalism is evil and it's failed on top of it all. So it's both evil and incompetent. It needs to be replaced by socialism or communism, Bolshevism, whatever. So for them, the rise of Iran as a challenge to Western values and Western system and Western freedom, ahlan wa sahlan, they welcome it because
Amazing.
they believe we are the problem. We Westerners, whether it's Israelis, Americans, I don't know who else, the Europeans, the Maloney, whoever, we are the problem, and in their eyes. So again, the enemy for this crowd, as was the enemy under Oslo, wasn't Arafat. It was those who raised the questions about the Oslo process, whether it was Netanyahu or others. It wasn't, and with Iran, it isn't Iran that's the enemy. It's those who are scared of what Iran can become, who want to take a hard line against Iran. That's why I say I'm not sure these people have the same concept of interests that
But
we do.
unfortunately,
It
these
doesn't
people
bother.
have tremendous power.
They do. We didn't get into some of the. I mean, we have that Adrian
Right.
Tabatabai. We also have Robert Malley. We have others in that narrow little clique of Iranian influence peddlers. But we also have people like Maher Bitar. Now, intelligence failure in Israel. Maher Bitar is a manifestation of what just happened. I'll give you, why do I say that? Maher Bitar was involved with UNRWA, the United Nations Relief Works Agency, a decade or two ago. Apart from being a radical on campus in BDS, he was employed by UNRWA at the precise time
David,
that UNRWA was.
one second, please. My son is calling. Hang on a second.
Sure.
Matanya, it's going okay. I'm doing an interview. Is everything all right? Can I call you back? Yes? I'll call you back in a few minutes, sweetheart. Okay, bye. Sorry. Go
Sure.
ahead.
So he was employed by UNRWA at precisely the heyday of transforming UNRWA schools in Gaza into missile launching sites and arsenals, and then hospitals in Gaza into launching sites, hospitals, bunkers, and bunker structures for leadership, and so forth. So here's a man who either saw it and agreed with it, or didn't see it when everybody on the face of the earth saw it. This was hiding in plain sight. I don't know anybody who didn't know about the missile launchers in UNRWA schools, because they'd been launching missiles from UNRWA schools. And we
it's
knew
not something you can hide.
It's not something you can hide. So this guy now has become the head senior director for intelligence in the National Security Council. This is the guy who is in charge of managing all intelligence that comes in and out of the White House. He is the guy who's singularly responsible for determining what the president sees and edits and presents and crops the information. So a guy that either agreed with Hamas or couldn't see the obvious is now the main intelligence person feeding information to the entire White House NSC.
So the White House has been infiltrated by the enemy, in a sentence.
Yeah, in a sentence, yes.
Wow.
These people should never have gotten clearances. These people should never have been put at the center of America. They don't believe in America.
Right.
You can't be a Marxist, a radical Marxist, radical BDS guy on the campuses and then joined UNRWA in its effort to turn Palestinian schools into launching sites and still be Western, still be a Western, have Western interests in mind. I mean, imagine the equivalent. And by the way, we have others. We have people in the State Department. Anthony Blinken, I believe, himself, has a picture of Alger Hiss on the wall. Of all people, Alger Hiss, the communist spy. Why on earth? Yeah, there's this mythology that he was railroaded and set up. Alger Hiss was a spy. You really have to be quite delusional to believe that he wasn't.
And they're doing this
Because
also
the Russians
openly.
admitted it.
Wow.
He admitted it, and Russia admitted it openly after the Cold War. We know this isn't the question. Yet that picture sits in his office. So, I mean, with people like that, how are you going to get a pro-American policy?
So Israel's really on its own to come back to.
I believe Israel's on its own. Now, the good news. It's hard news. It's difficult. But I think it's sober. It's something that is important for sobriety's sake, which is Israel's just been exposed wrongly. I mean, Israel's not truly weak, but it has been exposed as weak, and the perception is immense weakness. If Israel relies on Western power heavily to come back, one, it will tie Israel's strategic hands, and it won't be delivered the great strategic victory, because the United States isn't going to allow it's not going to greenlight any of this. So Israel just has to act and then ask for permission afterwards. Number one, the West won't buy into it ahead of time. Number two, and I think this is more important, there's a direct proportionality between the amount Israel acts alone and the perception of Israeli strength. So if Israel relies heavily on Western support and intervention, it confirms the narrative that Iran puts forward that it's not a viable state on its own, it's fragile, and it's not a real entity. It's not real, and it's weak, because it needs to supplement its weakness with American power. The more Israel delivers its own victory, the more alone it acts, the more it proves, shocks, and not only Tehran, but most importantly, other countries in the region that are either thinking of making war or thinking of making peace, that Israel is the powerful country they need to stick with. that you better be on Israel's right side, not wrong side.
So you think sending the aircraft carrier here might actually make Israel look weak?
No, I think the aircraft carrier is important because it shows that Israel isn't abandoned.
Okay.
That's
an important distinction.
It's an important distinction because in the Middle East, think tribally. The Middle East is still very defined tribally. The politics of Islam is a tribal politics. If your allied tribe, especially if you made a choice as a weaker tribe to side with a big tribe, if that tribe says you're not my friend anymore, that's a death sentence. Mm-hmm. It goes all the way back to Muhammad. Muhammad, the elites of Mecca wanted to kill him, and for what he was preaching, and his uncle took him in, and his uncle was a respectable guy. So as long as his uncle said he's mine, there was a protection of Muhammad, because if they killed Muhammad, then the uncle has the right to kill, revenge mm-hmm. killing and so forth. So it was essentially a protective umbrella. But at one point, the uncle couldn't do that anymore. He was weakening and etc. And he said, I just can't continue to protect you. Muhammad understood instantly that is his death sentence, and he had to run away mm-hmm. to Medina. That is a microcosm of the larger dynamic in the region with tribes. So Israel is a tribe in the Arab mind. It's a big tribe, a powerful tribe, but it's not as big and powerful as America. And America is the big friend of Israel. So America has abandoned Israel is the biggest damage that America can. It's not just it doesn't help. That actively damages Israel. It actively contributes to a perception of weakness, which, by the way, is, I think, one of the reasons why this even happened.
Right.
Because I think they perceived how much tension there was
between Biden and Netanyahu, and some of the internal conflict that was happening.
I don't think they would have dared do this. Mm-hmm. They wouldn't have dared do this under a more pro-Israeli administration. They did dare do this. Look, there were how many mini wars? Yeah, how many mini wars were there under Biden? Quite a few. How many mini wars were there under Trump? Zero. How many mini wars have there been under Biden? Already 2 or 3. Mm-hmm. Now this is not a mini war.
No, right.
The numbers of that shows you a lot. Anyway, the point I'm getting, by the way, that's why the Saudis are so angry at America too, because they feel betrayed. So I think the carrier matters because it's saying we're still your friend, and it's signaling the region that America hasn't totally abandoned Israel yet. Mm-hmm. I'm not so confident that they're, it's Golda Meir said it. Everybody loves to sympathize with dead Jews.
Yeah,
but we don't want to be dead Jews. And then it's going to be difficult to sympathize with Israel for administrations like the Biden administration.
So because this is a Jewish country, and because you and I are both very proud members of of those people, I have to bring in the Bible here in the Tanakh, because what you're describing also tribally is very much biblical. I mean, not as biblical, but the ancient world, when you had the suzerain agreements, right? You had a king or some kind of big power who brought other people under his wing. And that analogy or contract, if you will, has at least in the academic circles, been compared to the covenant at Sinai, right? So we were going to get this really big power called God, who's going to take his people under the wing. And there's a lot of similarities in even how the different contracts in the ancient world that we have found written up, and some of the wording in the Bible itself. It's a very clear message, at least for the people at the time. I will protect you. You will be my people. You will be loyal to me, and I will protect you. And so in a situation like what's happening today, as in any difficult situation, you also have a lot of that chatter here. Is this Gog and Magog? Is this the famous flash of evil and good that has been talked about or alluded to in so many different ways? But there's a lot of distress here also. Like, where is God? Like, again, since Saturday was the worst day for the Jewish people since 1945, and since the Nazis, more Jews were killed on Shabbat than in any other day since then. So there's a lot of that comes up, a lot of the angst, a lot of faith also, but a lot of, where is he? What's happening here? Is there a plan? And the more people die, I think we're going to be hearing that more and more, the anger and the disappointment, but also a rise in faith. Because ultimately, if you don't believe in God, well, you certainly can't believe in mankind, can we? So,
No.
For many of us, that becomes, and also, as they say, right, there's no atheist in a foxhole, but there are a lot of different emotions and a lot of different levels to what's happening here in Israel. And I wanted to say this because I know that a lot of my audience are people of faith, many different faiths, but people of faith. And ultimately that comes down to that. And so with everything, and I think, David, you gave us a great analysis here and really laid out a lot of the different issues that Israel is facing here now. And I'm glad you're here. And I know you gave blood this morning, you were telling me. So I want to let you go so you can drink some juice, which is an incredible thing to do. But, to keep Israel in your prayers. And I have to say, as an Israeli and an Israeli mother, we are very strong. The people here are the most amazing people ever. What is happening in this country to support the soldiers, to keep the morale up, just to share a very personal story. My youngest daughter is 8 months pregnant and her husband was called in. And she, of course, is not having an easy time, to say the least. And she posted on the family list yesterday. She said, you could say that it's like a really hard time to bring a baby into the world. But I look around at this country that I live in, and I'm so proud that I'm going to be having a child who will join this people, and how strong they are, and how amazing we are, and how, despite everything that's arrayed against us, we're not giving in. So I just want everyone to know that there is that. Do not feel sorry for us. Pray for us, help us in any way that you can. But we're going to come through this. And we're coming through this not just for us, but for all of you, because I think it's pretty clear that this evil starts with the Jews, always starts with the Jews, and never ends with the Jews. So supporting Israel is not doing us a favor. It's helping yourselves.
Absolutely.
And helping the world be the kind of place that we still hope it can and should be, that we've made some progress. And that the Torah was given into a world that looked a lot like what we're dealing with now. And the fact that this is an unusual occurrence to some degree, a great part of that is due to the Torah and to the moral code that it brought on the world and that many of us have adopted. And I think we need to keep our eye on that big picture as well, with all the stress and the concerns and everything that's happening every day.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was a naval officer in intelligence in a previous life in Washington, and my duty was on the weekends to replace the regular intelligence people in the alert center in the Pentagon. That's the central node of early warning and alert for the United States. And my place was Middle East Africa. I had the misfortune of taking over that desk right as the Rwandan genocide started.
Oh, God.
And I remember the Tutsis were being massacred right and left by the Hutus. And it was just horrific. But I do remember seeing the commander of the Tutsis say, "We will win. We will win because we're fighting to defend ourselves, and they're fighting to kill us. They're too busy wasting their time killing us and committing massacres to effectively fight, and we will win." And in fact, the Tutsis did win, although they're the ones who were slaughtered. And I believe in one weekend it was about 800,000, something like that, 700,000.
Incomprehensible
horrific,
numbers.
incomprehensible. Yeah. It wasn't one weekend; it was 1 week or two, but it was a horrific amount of destruction by the Houthis against. And by the way, again, the Hutus were much more aligned with Libya and Syria and blah blah blah. So again, same crowd.
Yeah.
But that's what we have to remember here. Evil ultimately is very dangerous. And it can never be, you can never turn your back on evil, and you can never tame it. But evil does, it does lay the seeds of its own destruction. We have to seize that, and we have to actively whether it's through the act of God or whether we have just the willpower and you believe in the faith of our people and the
And a combination of both.
3,000-4,000 year history or a combination thereof, you have to seize that vulnerability and you have to destroy that evil. But there is that vulnerability in evil that they're so driven by hatred that they don't focus entirely. And another great example of it, great horrific example, was to the very end, Hitler prioritized the transport of Jews to gas chambers over logistics for his army.
So that in that irrationality and that blind hatred, we have an opportunity to rid the world of them.
But we have that blind hatred against us now.
Yeah.
And by us, obviously, the Jews, not just the Israeli Jews. It doesn't seem safe to be an Israeli today, but believe me, every Jew should understand they're still going to be more safe in Israel than they are going to be. And we will see, unfortunately, in my view, in the coming weeks and years, days maybe, how unsafe Jews are abroad. And there they cannot defend themselves. They can't 48 hours later mobilize to defend themselves.
Right.
In Israel, they do.
In Israel, we can. Yes. We finally, after a very, very, very long time, can protect ourselves. And it doesn't always happen. And there are terrible mistakes that occur. But ultimately, we can do that. And we do it very, very, very well. And I hope that in the coming weeks, we'll do it absolutely as best as we can. David Wurmser, thank you so much. And thanks to Tabitha and to Ben for putting out the show. And thank you to all my listeners for caring so much. You don't know how much that means to us here, to understand that there is this energy, this positive energy and love that's coming to us from outside, and the prayers, of course. It means the world. So keep that up. Be in touch, of course. Eve.Harow@gmail.com. Just happy to hear from you whenever. And thank you, everyone. And may everyone come home safely. Adonai oz lamo yiten, Adonai yivarech et amo b'shalom. Take care, everybody. Eve Harow, Rejuvenation on the Land of Israel Network. Goodbye for now.